It was May 2019 in Bình Dương, a province in southern Vietnam. A man arrives at a house he had recently purchased in a quiet district. It was a modest home, nothing out of the ordinary, a single-story structure with white walls, a small courtyard, and a living space that had been left untouched for weeks. But before he could even step inside, something struck him as odd. The house was sealed shut. Several padlocks hung from gates, doors, and entrances, as if someone had gone to great lengths to keep people out. One by one, he broke them open, and after a while, with the outer barriers cleared, he turned to the main door. He slid the key into the lock, twisting it with a firm click. With a slight push, the door creaked open. As he stepped into the living room, his eyes landed on something strange. Scattered across the room were religious books, their pages filled with complex teachings and unfamiliar symbols. Some were stacked neatly, while others lay open, as if left behind in a hurry. Beside them, rolls of adhesive materials, duct tape, silicone sealants, and plastic sheets. And then, in the bedroom, there was a blue plastic water tank, large, sturdy, and completely out of place. Curious, he stepped closer. It stood firmly in the bedroom, its surface smooth and unmarked. Something about it felt off, too large to be storage, too out of place to be furniture. He knocked twice, expecting the hollow ring of an empty container, but instead, a dull, muted sound. The tank was dense, packed and sealed. Planting his feet, he pushed against the side, trying to shift it even slightly. But it barely moved. Whatever was inside wasn't just heavy, it was unnaturally so. He stepped back, wiping sweat from his brow, his pulse quickening. Then, hesitating only for a moment, he stepped closer. Curiosity creeping in, he grabbed the lid and took it off. And that's when he saw it. Strands of dark, matted hair, trapped beneath layers of hardened cement. This wasn't trash. This was a person. You're listening to Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, brought to you by One Up Media. This episode may contain sensitive details and graphic imagery. Listener discretion is advised. Still reeling from what he had just seen, the man staggered back, his breath uneven. Then, footsteps. His workers had arrived. They had come expecting a routine cleanup. But instead, they were about to witness something horrifying. As they stepped inside, their eyes landed on the blue plastic tank. Some hesitated, others moved closer, drawn to the strands of hair trapped beneath the hardened cement. A tense silence followed, and the realization settled quickly. Without another moment's hesitation, the homeowner reached for his phone. It wasn't long before police arrived, their patrol cars pulling up to the quiet street. Inside, they moved swiftly, scanning the scattered religious books and adhesive materials. But their focus immediately locked onto the sealed plastic tank in the bedroom. The strands of hair trapped in the cement left no doubt. They were dealing with a body. But something else also caught their attention. Outside, in the backyard, officers spotted another barrel, nearly identical to the one inside. But this one was in far worse condition. The plastic had buckled and split open in places, and the cement inside had fractured, revealing jagged cracks along its surface. Whatever was inside had been sealed away, but now, time and the elements had begun to break it apart. One officer stepped closer, his eyes scanning the damaged plastic tank. At first, it was difficult to tell what lay beneath the layers of hardened concrete, but something about it seemed off. As he examined the break more closely, he noticed irregularities in the surface, areas where the cement appeared uneven, as if it had hardened around something solid inside. Small gaps had also formed where the concrete had crumbled away, and among the rough, fractured surface, a few strands of hair peeked through, eerily similar to what had been found inside the house. This was likely another body. Within minutes, the entire property was locked down, police tape stretching across the perimeter as forensic teams moved in. What had started as one gruesome discovery had now escalated into something far more disturbing, a house concealing not one, but two bodies, buried in layers of cement, hidden in plain sight. Over the next few hours, police carefully removed the bodies from both barrels and transported them for forensic examination. Days later, autopsies confirmed the victims were two men, and through fingerprint analysis, their identities were revealed. The first victim was 50-year-old Tran Duc Lin, and the second was Tran Tri Tan, aged 27. With the bodies identified, police shifted their focus to the people who had lived in the house previously. Whoever they were, they had gone to great lengths to disappear, as they had left behind no personal belongings, no clear signs of recent activity, and no immediate clues as to where they had gone. Investigators dug into property records, combing through rental agreements, utility bills, and transaction histories to track down the previous occupants. Their search soon led to two names, Phạm Thị Thiên Hà and Trinh Thi Hong Hoa, the most recent tenants of the house. But had these women vanished to cover up a crime? Or was there another reason for their sudden departure? There was also another detail, something that made the crime scene even more unsettling. Scattered across the house were strange religious texts, some carefully arranged, others left open, as if a ritual had been abandoned mid-act. Had these beliefs led to murder, or been twisted into something far darker? And if so, what exactly had happened inside that house? As police worked to piece together the timeline, the autopsy reports provided a crucial detail. The two victims had likely died about a month before their bodies were discovered. When investigators reviewed rental records, they found something that raised even more suspicion. The two female tenants had vacated the house around the same time, approximately a month prior to the discovery of the bodies. This timeline was too precise to ignore. The first real break in the case came from neighbors. Some recalled seeing a small group of women living there, but their behavior had always seemed unusual. Unlike the other homes in the area, where families and tenants came and went freely, this house remained closed off from the world. When the women did step outside, it was brief, discreet, and without conversation. Eventually, police questioned the neighbors about when the tenants had left, but most had no clear answer. No one had seen them pack, no moving trucks had arrived, and there had been no signs of a departure. Within hours, a nationwide search was issued for the two women. About 50 kilometers away from the crime scene, in Thu Giao Mot City, life moved at a different pace. The streets were calm, the air thick with late afternoon heat, and in a modest hotel tucked away from the main roads, guests came and went without drawing much attention. Inside, the atmosphere was quiet, the soft hum of air conditioning and the occasional murmur of conversations at the front desk. It was the kind of place where no one asked too many questions, a temporary stop for travelers passing through. But in one of the upper floor rooms, a group of 4 women had been staying longer than most. By now, news of the gruesome discovery in Bình had spread across the country. Nationwide alerts were issued for Pham and Trinh, the two women identified as the previous occupants of the house and key suspects in the case. Their names and faces were plastered across newspapers, aired on television, and distributed to law enforcement agencies nationwide. And as it turned out, someone was paying attention. At the hotel front desk, an employee was likely flipping through the morning paper. The headline stood out immediately. Two women wanted for questioning in connection with bodies found in a water tank. A glance at the accompanying photos, and the employee's stomach tightened with unease. The employee didn't react or show alarm, but in a quiet, calculated movement, they turned toward hotel security and discreetly whispered what they had just realized. Within moments, a call was placed, and police were on their way. But upstairs, Pham and the others were already on edge. They had been in hiding for weeks, moving carefully, ensuring their presence remained as unnoticed as possible. But now, something felt off. Maybe it was the way the hotel staff had started glancing in their direction, or maybe it was pure instinct, the same instinct that had kept them one step ahead until now. Whatever the reason, Pham wasn't about to ignore it. Without hesitation, the group prepared to leave, grabbing their belongings and heading downstairs to the front desk. They asked for their identification back, but the receptionist hesitated for a moment, just long enough for Pham to sense that something was wrong. Then, the hotel's main entrance had been locked. Before they could react, the distant glow of red and blue lights flashed through the lobby windows. On May 18, 2019, Phạm Thị Thiên Hà and Trinh Thi Hong Hoa were arrested on suspicion of murder. Along with them, two other women who had been traveling in their group were also taken into custody. Their arrest was a breakthrough for investigators, but the case was far from over. There were still critical questions left unanswered. Why were two men murdered and encased in concrete? What really happened inside that house in Bình? And most importantly, who was Phạm Thị Thiên Hà? Before she was a wanted fugitive, Phạm Thị Thiên Hà was just another ordinary woman living in Ho Chi Minh City. Records state that she was educated, driven, and independent, the kind of person who seemed to have her life figured out. In her late 20s, she opened a coffee shop in a prime location, a cozy yet modern space that quickly became a favorite among locals and travelers alike. She poured everything into the business, her time, her passion, her savings, and for a while, it paid off. Her life was stable, comfortable, successful. But somewhere along the way, something changed. At some point in 2017, her focus began to shift. The coffee shop, which was once the center of her world, no longer seemed to hold the same importance. Her mind was elsewhere. And then, almost overnight, she walked away from it all. She closed her business, distanced herself from old friends, and withdrew from the life she had built. Why? Because she had found something new. She had discovered Falun Gong, a practice that, to outsiders, appeared to be nothing more than a form of spiritual meditation. But beneath its surface, Falun Gong was known as one of the most controversial and divisive spiritual movements in the world. While it promoted inner peace and self-discipline, many critics accused it of being a cult, enforcing extreme beliefs and strict, unwavering devotion from its followers. For Pham, it may have begun as a simple curiosity, but it quickly consumed her, leading her down a path that would ultimately end with two men dead at her hands. With the suspects now in custody, investigators were finally in a position to piece together the truth. Now, the 4 prime suspects in the case were sitting across from them in the interrogation room, and it was time to hear their side of the story. But before they could understand why the 2 men were murdered, they needed to uncover what they had been involved in and how they had ended up in that house to begin with. The answers, it seemed, were hidden in plain sight. When the police first entered the house, they found stacks of religious texts with their pages filled with complex symbols and spiritual teachings. There were also rolls of adhesive materials, duct tape, silicone sealants, plastic sheets, all used to seal off rooms, restrict movement, and block out the outside world. In preliminary interviews, neighbors told police that they recalled strange, silent gatherings at night. They spoke of figures moving behind the covered windows, and sometimes the faint murmur of voices chanting words they couldn't understand. To the outside world, it was just another house. But inside, it was something else entirely. One by one, the 4 women were questioned. At first, they spoke calmly, methodically, as if none of this was unusual. There was no panic, no visible guilt, but something about them felt off. As part of standard procedure, police conducted a background check to see if the 4 suspects had any prior records or connections to each other. It turns out the 4 women were followers of Falun Gong, one of the most controversial spiritual movements in the world. Pham initially led a small but dedicated group of followers, all practicing under her strict guidance. No one knows for sure how many members she had at the start, but various reports estimate it to be between 4 and 10. Over time, some of the members began to walk away. Perhaps it was the harshness of the practices or the rigid rules that she imposed, but whatever the reason, their numbers thinned. But among those who stayed was Pham's own mother. As the group shrank, those who remained became even more cut off, because Pham had no intention of letting them stay connected to the outside world. Determined to keep the group together and to continue their practice in absolute secrecy, she made a decision. In October 2018, she rented a house in Bin Jong, far from prying eyes, where the remaining members could devote themselves fully to their beliefs. This was the very house where the 2 bodies would later be found. It was clear that Pham was the one everyone listened to, the one who made the decisions. And when it came to death in the group, she didn't hesitate. According to Pham, the entire ordeal began with the first victim, Lin. She told police that his death was a choice he made on his own, insisting that neither she nor her followers had played a direct role in it. It happened during one of her strictest rituals yet, a 14-day absolute fast. No food, no water, only meditation and faith. To Pham, this was a test, a way to separate the worthy from the weak. And in her eyes, Lin was too weak. She claimed that after just a few days without food, Lin had completely broken down. He could no longer endure the fasting and the isolation. And so, one night, he tried to escape. But he never made it. Pham told police that in his attempt to escape, he threw himself from a second-floor window and committed suicide. But even in death, Lin remained trapped within the group. There was no funeral, no report to the authorities. His body was simply left in a room, hidden away from sight. As the days passed, the air in the house grew heavy with the scent of decay. Eventually, when the stench became unbearable, the group stuffed his remains inside a plastic water tank, filled it with concrete, and sealed it shut with tape. This was the order given from Pham. But Tan's case was different. Unlike Lin, Tan had stayed. In the weeks that followed, life inside the group continued as normal, or at least as normal as it could be under her rule. The fasting, the isolation, the strict discipline, nothing had changed. But Lynn's death had left something behind. A lesson, a warning. Tan had witnessed firsthand what happened to those who couldn't keep up, and for a while, he did what he could to fall in line, to avoid drawing attention. But no matter how hard he tried, a constant reminder lingered in the room. The plastic water tank, it sat there, unmoving, sealed, heavy, and silent. Tan may not have spoken about it, but he knew what was inside. He knew what had happened to Lynn. And maybe, deep down, he knew what would happen to him if he didn't listen to Pham. In the weeks that followed, Tan's faith began to waver. He began to struggle with the teachings, just as Lynn had. During her police interview, Pham stated that Tan had once been deeply committed to the group, even immersing himself in the routines and distancing himself from the outside world. By all accounts, he had been fully committed to Falun Gong, but according to Pham, he was slowly becoming corrupted, drifting too far from their teachings and resisting any attempt to change. In her version of events, Tan's defiance had begun with small transgressions. While the others fully committed to their fasting rituals, he allegedly snuck food in secret, breaking what Pham saw as a sacred purification process. To her, his violations weren't just physical, they were spiritual. She claimed he had begun harboring impure thoughts, showing signs of desire, and craving earthly pleasures that defied the strict discipline she imposed. Then, one day, Tan crossed the line. Pham caught him masturbating inside the house, something she saw as an unforgivable act. In her mind, this wasn't just a personal failure. It was a contagion, a sign of moral weakness that could possibly be spread to the others in the group. To her, it was a sickness that had to be cut out before it spread. And there was only one solution. Pham did not intend to kill him outright. Instead, she isolated him, locked him inside a room, and left him there, alone. No food, no water, no human contact. He was given only time. Time to repent. Time to reflect. Time to suffer. As the days passed, Tan's body began to weaken. His muscles grew sluggish, his mind foggy from dehydration and starvation. Eventually, he was so weak and malnourished that his health was in severe decline. Then, one day, Pham entered the room. She stood over him, watching as he struggled to move, to speak, to hold himself upright. And then, in a voice calm and assured, she told him not to worry. She would heal him. Shortly after, she sent for one of the women in the group to buy an electric actuator, a device that's commonly used in acupuncture treatments, meant to restore balance, ease pain, and bring the body back to health. At least, that's what she wanted him to believe. By the time the machine arrived, Tan was already too weak to fight back. Under Pham's instructions, the women pressed the device against Tan's body, sending a sudden jolt of electricity coursing through him. His muscles seized, his breath hitched, and a sharp, involuntary gasp escaped his lips before his body slumped to the floor. But it wasn't enough. He was still alive. So Pham stepped forward to finish what she started. She reached down, wrapped her hands around his throat, and began to squeeze. For the next few days, Tan's body remained untouched, left in the room as if it no longer existed. Meanwhile, the others carried on with their practices, completely unfazed. But the smell soon became impossible to ignore. They couldn't leave him there forever. And so, They followed the same method as before. Another barrel was brought out. His body was lowered inside, concrete poured over him, the container sealed shut with tape. After months of investigation, Phạm Thị Thiên Hà and her followers stood trial for the murders of Tran Duc Linh and Tran Tri Tan. She stood before the court and justified everything, claiming that Linh had chosen to take his own life, that his death was not their responsibility. As for Tan, she argued that his execution had been necessary, a purification to rid the group of his spiritual corruption. Her followers echoed her words, but when pressed, they insisted that they were only following orders. However, the court refused to accept their version of events because the evidence painted a far more brutal reality. Lin's death wasn't as simple as Pham claimed. His autopsy showed signs of physical trauma, raising questions about what really happened. If he had truly taken his own life, why was his body kept hidden for days? Why hadn't anyone sought help? And then there was Tan. He had been locked away and starved, left to grow weaker until he was barely able to fight back. Then he was electrocuted and strangled to death. His murder was clearly premeditated. This was never about purification. This was about control, submission, power. Pham was not just a spiritual leader. She had isolated, manipulated, and ultimately executed those who no longer fit into a vision of the group. And the other women? They had stood by and allowed it to happen. They could have stopped it. They could have walked away. But instead, they helped cover the bodies in concrete. To the court, there was only one conclusion. This was murder. After a lengthy trial, the verdict was delivered. Phạm Thị Thiên Hà was sentenced to death, while her mother, Trinh Thi Hong Hoa, and the two other women, Thao and Huyen, received prison terms ranging from 13 to 22 years for their involvement in the crimes. The spiritual practice of Falun Gong originated in China in the early 1990s. Its followers believe that through meditation, slow-moving exercises, and moral teachings, they can achieve spiritual enlightenment and even supernatural abilities. While some consider it a spiritual discipline, many critics and even governments have labeled it as a cult. One of the most controversial and extreme cases linked to Falun Gong involves its practitioners rejecting modern medical treatment, believing that illness should be cured solely through spiritual cultivation and meditation. This has led to cases where followers have refused life-saving medical care, relying instead on meditation and their faith. However, Falun Gong is also at the center of a far more disturbing allegation. In 2006, reports surfaced claiming that some practitioners in China were being systematically targeted for organ harvesting. Investigations alleged that some political prisoners, primarily those who believed in Falun Gong, were being executed on demand to supply China's organ transplant industry. Today, over 10 countries have banned Falun Gong, citing it as a threat to public order or national security. Although Phạm Thị Thiên Hà and her group claimed to follow Falun Gong, Vietnamese media reported that her practices deviated significantly from its core teachings. Rather than adhering to the belief's traditional principles, Pham created her own interpretations, like extreme fasting, long periods of self-isolation, and even self-imposed exile. Some people argue that Pham's actions had little to do with Falun Gong itself, and that media coverage of the case was shaped to cast the practice in a negative light. But in the end, this was never just about faith. It was about power. Phạm Thị Thiên Hà didn't guide her followers toward enlightenment. She led them into darkness. And when belief is twisted into blind obedience, the line between devotion and destruction disappears. Heinous, an Asian true crime podcast, is brought to you by One Up Media. This episode was produced by Guang Jin, edited by Alex, audio experience by Bin Vu and Ethan Sam. Thank you for listening. We'll see you in the next one.